OPB Podcasts.
From the Gert Boyo studio, it's OPB Politics Now for Thursday, December 18th. What a year it has been in Oregon politics. President Trump's first year in office was a whirlwind. Portland welcomed a new mayor and a new form of government. Democrats held supermajority power in Salem, but struggled to capitalize on a critical transportation bill. Today, we'll look back on the stories that shaped Oregon politics and what's to come in 2026. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB Politics reporter Bryce Dole.
I'm OPB Politics reporter Dirk Vanderhart.
I'm OPB Politics reporter Lauren Dake.
And I'm OPB Portland Politics reporter Alex Zielinski.
Thanks for being here, everyone.
Hey,
nice
Bryce.
to see you. Okay, we have a lot to cover today, but I'd like to start by just going around the room and having each of you describe this year in local politics in a single word. Dirk, you first.
I've given this some thought, Bryce. I'm going to go with flailing.
Okay.
I've given this very little thought, Bryce, and I'm going to go with divisive.
Okay. Alex?
I have given this a bit more thought. And for Portland, I'm going to say juvenile. And I'm going to say that I'm going to clarify that because I feel like that can come off in like a bad.
Okay.
One word.
If I have space, just because I mean that in like the truest form of the word, just because in Portland we had this brand new system of government and brand new slate of elected officials. Everyone's really inexperienced, and it feels like youthful.
Mm-hmm. That's a great transition because that's what we're going to start with today. Alex, there were obviously some major changes in Portland this year. So let's start with that new form of government. Remind us what changed and how those changes shaped City Hall over the past 12 months.
Sure. So this year was the first under a voter-approved plan to overhaul nearly every piece of Portland's government. And I've talked about this so many times. I'm going to try to boil it down as quickly and succinctly as I can.
Okay.
So basically, Portland City Council grew from 5 to 12 members, with the mayor no longer having a vote on council. Those councilors are now elected to represent geographic districts instead of the entire city. And we have now 4 districts with 3 councilors per each. City councilors also no longer oversee city bureaus. That's a job for the new city administrator's office. And we also changed our form of voting to ranked choice. So that meant that we had 12 brand new councilors elected who started January and a brand new mayor who weren't given too much guidance on how to steer this new ship. Understandably, there have been some issues like council meetings taking hours longer than expected because every single person wants to talk, and a new caucus of progressive councilors holding meetings that might violate state laws, and then just, fighting between the new branches of government for still not knowing who was responsible for what. I've been reflecting with other City Hall nerds about this past year, and there are a couple things that stand out as wins so far as well, though. And first, it's the increased representation of our new council.
Right.
Like I said, we now have people elected from different geographic districts, which means that these long ignored pockets of the city have politicians now plugged into their wants and needs and listening to them. That's particularly been felt in East Portland's District 1, which has always seemed to be sidelined in city conversations, probably because only 2 city councilors have ever lived in those neighborhoods. And councilors are just getting out more and in their districts and a lot, and holding town halls and events and seeming to really embrace that new role. And the second thing, other positive, is that by no longer having politicians running city bureaus, general city operations are running a lot more efficiently and smoothly. You have departments working together that used to be kind of cordoned off because they're now reporting to the same office. They used to be reporting to other politicians and not able to really communicate. And so you see that kind of playing out in some of the basic city services. So a lot of wrinkles still, but some progress.
Alex, I'm curious about the element around representation. Do you think that over the past year that vision around having greater representation for the different parts of the city, do you think it's coming to fruition in like a meaningful way that's starting to impact people's lives? What do you think?
It's tricky to measure. I do think we're seeing issues come up in City Hall that we haven't in the past because of who's out in those districts representing them. For instance, there was a whole conversation around funding new sidewalks out in East Portland.
Right.
I feel like that has been a common complaint that has just been long ignored, that streets are pretty terrible and there's no sidewalks in many neighborhoods in East Portland. And we saw the councilors representing that area bring that to council and get funding and get it passed. And so there are little hints that yes, it's moving in the right direction in that sense. But, it's really hard to know how that's really felt by Portlanders living in those areas.
Mm-hmm. And it, granted, has only been a year, right?
Yeah.
So we've talked about Portland Mayor Keith Wilson on this show a lot. He came into office with this big promise to address Portland's homelessness crisis, the latest, leader to make this kind of promise of many. In your view, was he able to achieve his vision under this new format?
Well, I think first to note, he has addressed homelessness in Portland for sure. But he did fall short of his big goal to end unsheltered homelessness by December 1st. As you know, there are still people living outside in Portland right now. But I would say that the style of government didn't act as an obstacle to that goal. As mayor, Wilson oversees the city administrator's office, this new office, and he can direct them to carry out contracts and certain plans without council's sign-off, which really helped him swiftly open up a bunch of new overnight shelters across the city that are run by nonprofits through contracts. What also helped is that Wilson really had the support of the full council to try out his strategy this first year. So they didn't really touch any of his budget plans for shelter. I'm not so sure he has that kind of buy-in going forward, though. So he has his work set up for him in the new year. But I don't think his big overarching goal was hampered at all by the form of government.
Mm-hmm. And a major challenge for both Wilson and the council was how best to respond to the Trump administration, right?
Sure.
Especially in this moment where the president was threatening to send the National Guard to protect the ICE facility in Portland. Again, we've covered this on the podcast before, but remind us, how did you see the city's leaders responding to the president this year?
Yeah, well, to start, I think it's a good reminder to note that all elected city officials are Democrats and don't support Trump. So none of them have been quiet about opposing Trump's threats to Portland publicly. The city pulled some of the expected levers against the federal intervention early. It joined several lawsuits against the Trump administration's threats to immigration policies and equity standards and other things earlier this year. Some of that ramped up in October, though, after Trump threatened to sic the guard on Portland, like you mentioned. Councilors passed a resolution pledging protections to immigrant communities. They joined, No Kings protests. They showed up in court hearings on the constitutionality of the deployment order. One councilor, a former Army member, called on his fellow veterans to protest Trump and pressed active National Guard members to disobey orders to deploy in Portland. There's also this heightened focus on the building in South Portland where Portland's ICE offices are located. The federal government leases that building from a private landlord who has become a bit of a target in recent months. In September, the city issued a land use violation against that property owner, saying he broke an agreement with the city by allowing ICE to hold detainees at the facility for too many days. He's challenged that order, but it's still in place. And councilors also passed a new policy that would stick any landlord who leased to a detention facility with a new fee and also charge them more if chemical munitions spill into the streets or other land surrounding the property, a nod to some of the actions federal agents have made against protesters over the past few months. So big picture, the city can't do much about Trump, but it's getting creative, chipping around the sides and not easing up as we head into another year under his presidency.
Mm-hmm. And it's obvious that the Trump administration just kind of dominated the news cycle in every way this year, right? The president, for one thing, has been trying to dramatically shrink the federal government's workforce, its spending. This sparked huge protests against both the president and Elon Musk when Musk was leading the initiative around, or called, the Department of Government Efficiency. But Dirk, I want you to tell us a little bit about how the president's actions impacted the Oregon legislature during this last session.
Yeah, I would say the question of what Trump might do, was doing, really did hang over the 6-month legislative session this year. It was just always in people's mind. But I think we didn't really get any clarity on the full impact of federal policy until right after lawmakers adjourned in late June, because on July 4 is when Trump signed H.R. 1, his massive, his One Big Beautiful Bill Act, this massive tax cut bill, this spending bill. And that is really the thing that is going to have the most impact on Oregon politics moving forward. Because let's remember, there are new stringent criteria for people who want to sign up for Medicaid or SNAP benefits. Oregon is expecting billions and billions dollars less in federal funding in coming budget because of those changes. And that is going to force really hard conversations and decisions, I think, in terms of how much money does the state want to spend of its own general fund cash to backfill some of those losses to ensure people get SNAP benefits or health care versus how much does it keep for the priorities that it already has. We are also expecting just less tax revenue in the state's own coffers, not federal money, but actually state general fund money because of this tax cut bill, because of the way it interacts with how the state collects taxes. So this is, what most lawmakers I talk to are most focused on at this point. It's going to force, as I say, some really, really tough conversations and a budget reckoning in Salem that I don't think most lawmakers there have had to grapple with in their time in office.
Mm-hmm. I feel like this last year has just seen, state leaders just constantly adjusting to, the financial picture, given what the president was doing just on a regular basis. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there were questions about what might happen. I don't know that they were adjusting in real time as opposed to just trying to figure out how they might have to adjust. It's really the passage of H.R. 1 that has now forced the real hard conversations, as I say.
Right. And the biggest story of this year, in my view, very well might have been the president's attempts to deploy the National Guard to Portland.
Yeah.
Dirk, what were your takeaways from the saga that unfolded around the ICE facility here?
I mean, I think one major takeaway is that, as a lot of politicians were urging and pleading with, Portland didn't take the bait. I mean, I think, go back to September, right? President Trump first announced he's going to send the National Guard into Portland. He says it's burning, it's a lawless wasteland, and, there have been these ongoing protests for months that he is trying to quell. There was a real fear, I think, from a lot of people that this was going to be sort of a 2020 2.0. Portland was going to maybe see extensive, possibly destructive protests that might wind up being counterproductive as the city is trying to sort of stage this comeback. Instead, what did we get? We got the Frog Brigade, right? We got the emergency naked bike ride, this massive outpouring of people resisting Trump with, I think, a certain level of absurdity and joy.
We had people knitting in front of the facility.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
Yeah.
There we go. I think it did good things for the city's self-image, right? Portland got some of its mojo back and some clarity on who the city still is. And in the meantime, the courts seem to have taken care of the National Guard issue. They have blocked Trump from deploying troops here at this point. The protests are very, very minimal. I did bike by yesterday and saw a woman in an inflatable gingerbread man costume. So there's still some of that going on. But yeah. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think Portland didn't take the bait, and it went just about as well as it could have.
I wonder if we're going to see a bunch of reindeer outside the facility at some point.
Potentially.
And that was just one of so many stories around immigration enforcement this year, not only in Oregon, but throughout the country. We've seen here, ICE detentions really ramping up around the state. Dirk, you have been keeping tabs on this ongoing mystery, I guess, on the coast over what ICE might have planned there.
Yeah.
What's the latest on that?
Yeah, I mean, the latest is that everything is unclear. It is this mystery, and it just has been for more than a month. This all got started in early November when people in Newport sort of noticed the Coast Guard seemed to be shutting down an air base there, and that there were all these federal contractors poking around. And I think there's been a lot of evidence since that really firmly suggests ICE is or was seriously looking at building a new detention facility in Newport. Oregon is one of a handful of states that has no ICE detention facility at this point. It appears that ICE was looking in Newport. So there are, job postings for detention officers and other roles that were based in Newport. There are all these inquiries, as I say, from contractors for like renting blocks of hotel rooms or trucking thousands of gallons of human waste away from the airport every day. There's new reporting that actually seems to show federal contractors have toured the airport area. We're trying to figure out how a detention center might go in. What's not clear, though, is whether this is going to amount to anything or whether the federal government has now decided building something in Newport is just not worth, the juice is not worth the squeeze as it goes. You know, people are not happy with this idea there. The Trump administration has provided basically no clarity on what it was planning. That it has not filed necessary documents with the state that it would have to start a detention center. So we just don't know.
Yeah. And it's just hard to believe that, you know, that the community there, given how mysterious everything has been, will be, you know, openly welcoming to a new kind of facility like this, especially given the context around the helicopter.
I think it's far more strong than that. I think they will be adamantly opposed to anything like this.
Right. So I want to stick with the president, but Dirk and Lauren, you wrote a big story this year about Governor Tina Kotek. You started it by noting that 3 days before the governor's birthday, the president announced that he would deploy the National Guard here. You wrote, and I want to read what you wrote. You wrote, "In some ways, he could not have sent a better gift." What did you mean by that?
We meant it was really good timing for the governor. So the president's announcement came right around the same time that her transportation package finally passed the legislature. And her effort on that front, it really raised some questions about her leadership. The transportation package, it was a bit of a fiasco on many levels, which I think we'll probably get into. But basically, Democrats had to delay the votes. The session stretched on. Someone took a photo of the governor shopping in Astoria when many people felt like she should be in Salem. And then suddenly, the narrative shifted. Trump started talking more and more about Portland. He called the city war-ravaged. The state was thrust into the national spotlight, and that really became what everyone cared about. The governor appeared on NPR. She was interviewed by Rachel Maddow. She started making the national media circuit. People started talking a lot less about the tax hikes, and the governor started talking a lot more about how she was the right leader at the right time to stand up against Trump. And this was also all happening right around her birthday. And so there you have it. Happy birthday, Tina Kotek. The image of her shopping in Astoria was supplanted by her standing at the front of a march protesting the possible National Guard deployment.
Mm-hmm. And I remember that, you know, in her announcement for her campaign, one of the very first things that she's talking about is that she is the right leader to take on the president, right?
Right. It's a great distinction for her to be able to make against her, you know, any probably most Republican opponents.
Right. She will be talking a lot about Trump over the next year.
We are going to hear this. Yes. Buckle up.
Yeah. I wonder, so you guys talked to a lot of your sources in Salem about the governor. How are her allies seeing her progress over the past year or so?
Yeah, well, you're right. We talked to a lot of people for the story that we did on her. We talked to Democrats, we talked to Republicans, we talked to lobbyists, we talked to staffers. And largely, a lot of the people that we spoke with felt like she has struggled to move the needle on her top issues, like housing, behavioral health, and education. And I think it's noteworthy how many people we both spoke with who did not want to go on the record, Democrats who did not really want to go on the record speaking publicly about the governor.
Why not?
And I think because they don't want to be seen as critical of a governor that they assume is going to probably have another 4 years in Mahonia. So they were reluctant to go out against her. And, you know, one thing that the governor said we also interviewed her, and it's true, in her defense, she picked some difficult topics to tackle, difficult issues, right? She picked behavioral health, education, housing. These are longstanding, entrenched issues, but she made them her focus. She made them her top priorities. And she spent most of her first term being very laser focused on these issues. And because they are pretty clear, it's just easier to measure the success or failure, right? We can look at, is there more housing? What type of housing? Are more kids graduating from high school? And the metrics support this notion that the state has not improved a ton under this governor.
There are people that are very forcefully in her camp, obviously. She has allies. She's been around for a long time. And I think the argument they will make and are making is that, yes, she has picked extremely hard things. She will say she is not afraid to try to do hard things, and she feels like that's maybe her main goal. But even if she hasn't seen some of the movement that she pledged or said was her goal, she has seeded the ground. So, in education, there are new policies that have some more oversight over school districts. In housing, there are new zoning rules that theoretically are going to help housing go up more easily. Behavioral health, they are setting up more beds. She is saying things might not look like I would like them to look today, but we are really setting the groundwork for us to have real progress. And that, I believe, is the mantra of this campaign: unfinished business. Let's finish the job.
Mm-hmm. And the mantra of, if you stick with me, you will see the benefits in the long run.
Yeah.
We talked about the transportation bill. Let's stick with that. It was definitely one of the biggest political stories this year. After a lot of false starts, Democrats ultimately passed their bill to change how Oregon funds its roads and the employees who maintain them, as all of these state and local transportation agencies were facing budget gaps.
Yeah.
Dirk, you covered this bill extensively.
Maybe too much.
So much. There were so many moments that we could talk about, but I kind of wonder, how do you think that this whole political drama around this bill will be remembered by the people who live here?
Yeah, I think there's no question that this was a pretty big fumble by Democrats, principally legislative leaders and the governor. It is one big reason why I used that word flailing at top. We've talked about it a lot on the podcast, but coming into this year's session, we knew transportation had to be a major focus. Everyone had signposted that. It was going to be one of the big things. And then it just kind of kept being put off and put off. There were, I think, less than 2 months left of session by the time we actually saw a bill. And it was even well after that anyone had any idea what that bill might cost taxpayers. So, that was a problem. And at the same time, there are these real stakes, as you mentioned in the question, Bryce. ODOT has a structural problem with its funding. Local transportation departments have structural problems with their funding. But the state is running out of money to fund maintenance on its roads, operations. It was saying it might have to lay off like 10% of the ODOT workforce without more money. So that was a real issue. And how to fix it was something everyone seemed to agree was a big deal, but Democrats couldn't get Republicans on board with their ideas for raising taxes. Republicans said there were ways to do it without raising taxes if we cut to the bone in other areas.
At times, Democrats couldn't get their own party on board entirely.
Couldn't crucially get some members of their own party on board, and that's what created this logjam. Ultimately led to a far smaller bill in special session.
And it just seemed even more politically glaring, given that they have that supermajority power too.
Right. And again, we'll talk about it, but they did call a special session in summer and pass something.
And yeah, so we don't know how the story ends, right? Like the bill, Democrats thought that they had passed in a special session. It doesn't seem like it's moving forward as planned, right?
Yes. So we had this sort of, again, flailing special session. It was supposed to be a weekend, and it ends up lasting a month because one senator is battling some health issues and he's a key vote. At the end of the day, Democrats come away with a package that is expected to raise something like $4.3 billion over a decade. But that is not going to move forward as expected. Republicans quickly, and I have to say impressively, gathered well over enough signatures to block these new taxes the bill relied on until voters can weigh in. Last week, they submitted 200,000 signatures. They needed 78,000.
Right.
They collected all of those without any money, really, or any paid signature gatherers. It's a very impressive effort. And the upshot is we are at the outset of winter. ODOT needs to plow roads. ODOT needs to do all the things you do in winter. And suddenly this new money that the state was expecting would kick in on January 1st with a higher gas tax, some higher registration fees, a number of things, is not going to be coming because these signatures were submitted. Those tax hikes are on ice until voters can have a say. So we are still in a mess. We don't know what the answer is to this transportation funding quagmire we're in.
And ODOT has been under so much scrutiny and had some major shakeups this year. Most recently, the agency's boss announced that he is stepping down. Lauren, you have also been covering changes at other state agencies that you cover. Let's talk about the Oregon Department of Human Services, which recently saw a change in leadership as well. What happened?
Bryce, let's talk about DHS. How much time do we have?
We have enough time.
Okay, great. I want to set the scene here because this is one of the state's largest agencies, right? And it is charged with taking care of some of the most vulnerable residents. It takes care of seniors in long-term care facilities, to kids placed in foster care, to those with developmental disabilities. It's the agency that oversees the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, which was in the news a lot this year. Mm-hmm. It has nearly 12,000 employees, and its budget is more than $22 billion.
A big deal.
It oversees a lot of taxpayer dollars, and it affects a lot of Oregonians' lives, and it's just kind of constantly under some kind of scrutiny. The child welfare program has struggled for a long time to find adequate placements for kids in care. This session, the governor backed a very controversial bill that would have allowed the agency to send kids back out of state. That's something they tried years ago. It had pretty poor outcomes for a lot of kids. That effort failed. The agency is under several court orders. So all of this, in the midst of all of this, state senators confirmed a new leader. The longtime leader retired, and the governor nominated Liesl Wendt. And I think people are just waiting to see, can she turn this agency around?
Mm-hmm. Another agency that has been under scrutiny this year that you've been covering is the Oregon Youth Authority. This is the agency that oversees young people that are in the criminal justice system, right?
Yes.
Not only did this agency make headlines, but its longtime leader was fired by the governor. It now has a new leader. Why has there been so much turmoil here?
This is another example of a state agency charged with taking care of pretty vulnerable young people. The first big news that really broke about this agency this year was that there was this massive backlog of complaints made by children and teenagers in the state's custody that were not being properly handled. So they were making the complaints, and then, the next steps after those complaints were just sort of, the ball was dropped. And these complaints were, kids saying that they were being mistreated, sexually assaulted or abused. And from there, it just feels like the problems continued to cascade. Lawsuits were filed. A lot of kids accused current staff of sexually abusing them. There was a pediatrician who had been on staff at McLaren, which is the largest juvenile correctional institute in the state, who was accused of abusing just dozens of kids, over decades. And several lawsuits have been filed related to that. And those lawsuits, I think what is just so sort of disheartening. It says that, this abuse was so widespread, people knew about it, but that there was just this culture of indifference that allowed it to continue. So yeah, the governor, again, fired the longtime director, and now this is yet another state agency with a new director. Mm-hmm.
I remember that during last session, lawmakers talked a lot about accountability, right? And they wanted to pass meaningful policies around accountability. I wonder if all of the issues that you've been describing about these different state agencies, like if it's going to come up in the governor's race very much.
Yeah, I mean, that will be really interesting to see. I remember in the gubernatorial race between Kate Brown and Newt Buehler, that child welfare became a pretty big issue. And it's certainly something that I've heard the Republican challenger, Senator Christine Dreesen, bring up and talk about. I believe she sits now as a senator on the Human Services Committee.
Right.
It would make sense for her to raise it as an issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's look forward now and let's do a lightning round. I would like each of you to talk about the biggest political questions that you have going into the next year. We're going to do something different to start. Let's first go behind the glass to our editor, Andrew Thien. Andrew, what are you most curious about this year? What will you be tracking?
Yeah, one of the questions I'm asking is, where is Melissa Fireside?
Right.
Melissa Fireside, if folks who are listening to this podcast probably know, she was a Clackamas County Commissioner very shortly after winning in November of 2024. 2 months after winning that position, in a key position in this suburban district, she was embroiled in allegations of fraud. She resigned. She was in the legal system, awaiting justice on that front. The allegations were wild. Allegations of defrauding an 83-year-old man who was, just the boyfriend of a state lawmaker's relative.
Right.
Just something you don't see a lot in run-of-the-mill political stories. And, as we were kind of waiting to see what would happen, Melissa Fireside apparently is gone. And, it's a wild story, but her son is also gone too, who is a 9-year-old. So there were reports that she had left the country to Mexico and maybe to Europe. This was a couple months ago now, and we still actually don't know where she is. So as of this recording on December 18th, that's one of my questions for 2026.
Okay, Alex, let's go to you. What will you be tracking here in Portland? What's your question?
Yeah, no missing politicians as far as I know so far.
Good.
But for me, it's just like, how is this new government going to succeed? In Portland, we're entering the sophomore year. So I'll be watching how some of the kinks that I identified and pointed out over the past year might be getting fixed or being made worse. That includes how councilors and the mayor will navigate yet another challenging budget year, while the mayor will continue to push forward a costly homelessness plan that some are beginning to question. We also have several elections on the radar in the fall. Half of the city council offices are on the ballot, which will also kind of change the tenor of a lot of these council meetings going forward this year. There are also several ballot measures advancing, one that would use money from a climate investment fund to hire more police, and another that would allow Portlanders to vote on how 2% of the city budget is spent. Those are coming up in November. And then we also have we have two races for the two top leadership roles in the region, aside from the mayor, the Multnomah County chair and Metro president. Neither office will have incumbent challengers. Multnomah County chair Jessica Vega-Peterson announced yesterday that she won't be running, and Metro president Lynn Peterson is term limited. So it could make for a pair of fun races to follow.
Dirk?
The big thing, I think, for me is really just this budget mess that we're in, right? We don't have money for ODOT necessarily. How are lawmakers going to try to close that gap? We know that there will be cuts this session, and then in 2027, even more so when they pass a new 2-year budget, we are talking about billions of dollars in holes. So Democrats are really going to have to do something they have not had to do in recent memory, which is tighten belts, figure out where they need to cut programs, disappoint some constituents, and maybe try to find new money in an environment where citizens are very, very much not really feeling those efforts. So, we've talked about cap and trade. Could that come back to fund transportation?
Right.
Governor Tina Kotek is talking about economic development. Is she going to start proposing tax cuts to corporations to come to the state? There's just so many possibilities, and it is a real maze that the Democratic supermajority is going to have to navigate, and that is a big thing I'll be watching.
Okay, Lauren?
Well, like we talked about at the top of the show, the governor is seeking re-election. Most people expect that effort to be successful and sort of anticipate she's going to be elected to another 4 years. But she is facing a rematch against Republican Christine Drazan.
Potentially.
Potentially. Historically, that's right. I do not think that political rematches tend to go super well for the challenger, but there are a lot of outstanding questions. How unhappy are Oregonians? The economy is expected to get worse. That could be a factor. And then what Dirk is nodding to here is there's a lot of talk about former NBA player Chris Dudley, who has been considering whether to get into the race. He ran against Democrat John Kitzhaber years ago. He came very close to beating him. I don't think any Republican challenger has gotten closer to a Democrat in modern times, minus Dennis Richardson, who won the Secretary of State race, but talking about the gubernatorial race here. But listen, Republicans always have an uphill battle in this state. There has not been a Republican governor since the 1980s. Bryce, I don't know if you've heard of Clyde Drexler, but he was on the Blazers the last time we had a Republican in Mahonia. So that's a long time. We'll also be keeping our eyes on the U.S. Senate, where U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley is seeking re-election, and there are always fun state legislative races that will pop up as we get closer to the election.
And not to mention that this is a midterm. So, who knows how that will affect things too. Okay, let's leave it there. Happy holidays, everyone. And thank you so much for your reporting this year.
Thanks, Bryce.
Thank you, Bryce.
Thanks.
This week's episode of OPB Politics Now was recorded live in the Gert Boyle studio. It was produced by Andrew Thien, and our audio engineer is Stephen Cray. Our music comes from Audio Network. We'll be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting at opb.org. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.